to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rose, your host, and today is our 65th episode. I'm interviewing John Ratliff today. John and I have only met a few times, but I've known of John for many years through the scaling up process and the scaling up book that Vern launched, and that introduced me to some of his businesses. So I'm delighted to be actually talking to him across the waves today when he's in Philadelphia. John is the CEO of Scaling Up Coaches Organization. And I met John last when he was in London talking about how to grow the value of your business and prepare for exit. We might talk about that. We might talk about many other things in this conversation today, but I'm really delighted. John, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's just start at that. You're the CEO of the Scaling Up Coaches Organization. Now, I know what Scaling Up is, and many people listening to this do, but for those who don't understand what the Scaling Up Organization is, because there's a big thing there, what is it about Scaling Up that attracted you to want to take on this role?
So interestingly, we used the scaling up methodology. I started a call center company from scratch in 1995 in a 2-bedroom apartment and no employees, which don't start a 24-hour-a-day business with no employees. That's lesson number one. Actually, that's probably the first 10 lessons. But yeah, so start from scratch and then grew that. It took about 7 years to get to $1 million in turnover. US, and then started to do acquisitions in 2003 and bought 24 companies between 2003 and 2011, and then exited to a strategic buyer for about close to 5 times what the industry average multiple was in that space.
Wow.
And we can talk a lot about, how we did that and how you can, why industry averages are you shouldn't even pay attention to, but yeah, so we were growing so quickly that we needed a methodology. We needed something to help us keep the business on the rails and not go wildly off track. And I was in EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization in Philadelphia, and got introduced to Vern's work there, and then I went through Vern's program, Birthing of Giants, if you're familiar. Now it's called the Entrepreneurial Masters Program, which I still think is the best single business education event I've ever attended. It's 4 days over 3 years, so it's 4 days at a time over 3 summers. And so I went through Birthing of Giants, EMP, and that's when I really got kind of deeply knowledgeable about the scaling up methodology. It was called the Rockefeller Habits back then, the good old days. It's 25 years now. I don't know if you know that, but
25.
It's the 25th anniversary of Vern founding what was Gazelle's, now called Scaling Up, and he's re-releasing the book Mastering the Rockefeller Habits in a couple of weeks. So I believe
that book comes out on October the 18th, because I ran a workshop this week and I said to the guys, you can't order it yet, but I'm going to send you copies from October the 8th onwards. So I'm hoping October the 8th is the date it comes out.
I think you're right. Yeah, and we'll be in Denver for that event. So, but yeah, so I got introduced to the methodology, and it's actually a funny story. When you go to Birthing of Giants, you go as the entrepreneur, but you don't take your team with you. It's just the entrepreneur, and 65 people from around the world, and I think there were 20 or 25 countries represented in my class of 65. And so you go and you like most good business education events, you get all excited and you come back and you've got a whole team back running your company, and you walk in with all these new ideas and they look at you like you have 3 heads and say, get out of here, we're busy. So the first 2 years of Birthing of Giants, that's what happened. I came back and they're like, no, we're not doing any of that. So we couldn't afford it, but it was probably towards the end of 2008. I had just finished the 3rd year, graduated from BOG, and same thing. I came home and they said, no, we're not doing any of that stuff. And I was, I was a pretty, I'd like to lead people by letting them kind of choose their path and make their own good decisions, even though my decision was we need to implement scaling up.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I thought, I've got to have them see it and hear it directly from, the author, directly from Vern. So we piled into a couple cars and went to DC, and Vern was doing a 2.5-day event on scaling up. And so we get there, and again, we couldn't afford it. It was probably, with hotels and everything, a $20,000, $25,000 expense. And so I scraped the money together. We get down there, and I can't make this up. We're about 2 hours in on the first day, and we have our first break. It's like 10:30, and I get up from the break, and the whole team is like, "This is great. We got to get back and implement this like right away." And I'm like, "I'm gonna kill every one of you. I've been saying this for 3 years. You threw me out of the room every time I brought it up." So I do think in the work that we do, there's value in having the whole team experience the learning. And that's one of the big evolutions really at scaling up, is now we like the team-based approach. I know when you coach, you like probably to have the team there, and it's so much easier if you don't have to translate it as the entrepreneur, if the team can learn it kind of directly. So
it makes a big difference.
Yeah. So that's how I got introduced to scaling up. We used it very successfully to scale that business. And then my COO from that company, Kevin O'Connor, now is coaching other companies on scaling up. And we have a business called Align 5 that we run, and we've got Kevin doing coaching. We have a co-working space and some other things. So
nice.
I run the scaling up organization, and I also own and operate Align 5. So kind of see it from a lot of different seats at the table.
And it's lovely the fact you've been there and done it. And I think you've been through that Birthing a Giants program. You've been through the EEO programs. Obviously, Vern created that as well originally. So you've seen this grow, and you're proof of that it worked. At the end of the day, proof is in the pudding. You've actually proved it works. You took your business, you sold it for 5 times multiple, and we'll come back to what that means in a minute. But actually, you've proved this stuff works. It reduces the drama, reduces the chaos, improves the cash flow, improves the revenue, and you proved it there. I want to come back to something you said about the team came in there, and you threw a couple of hours in, they came back and said, "Hey, this is the best thing. Why didn't you tell us all about this?" I had a phrase. I worked with someone right at the beginning of my journey back in 2005, and he used to use the phrase, "When the student is ready, the master will appear." And I think that's exactly right with a lot of people in businesses. We've got to take them in and show them what they think they want something, but actually we can show them what they need eventually. And I think actually it's only me to get in the room, the people then come back and say, "Hey, John, why didn't you tell us about this earlier?" But you've been telling them all the time. They've just been missing it because they just weren't ready.
Correct.
To hear that story. And I think that's the key piece I hear from that sometimes people just need to be ready to hear this.
I totally agree. And, normally that's in the middle of some drama or chaos that, hey, if we implement this, some of that chaos might actually go away.
Yeah.
Their hair was on fire when they finally got it, because we were growing so quickly. I think we bought 6 companies in 2009, just 2009 alone. Wow. And there's no way we could, right. And we were able to do that because the business was functioning at a level that our bank, when the financial crisis happened, we were using a bank financing to buy the companies we were buying. And on that Monday morning when the world changed over the weekend and banks were collapsing, and our bank called and said, "Hey, we want to come see you today." And I thought it was to come call the loan, even though we were we were inside our covenants, but I thought they were coming to give us bad news and
close you down.
We walked into the conference room, and the lead banker who'd become a good friend of mine, we've been working together at that point for about 6 years. And he said, "First of all, we just want you to know that the bank is okay. We're not overexposed in real estate, but we have very few of our borrowers that we're feeling good about right now. And of the very few that we feel good about, you're first on the list. So as a show of good faith, we're going to double your line of credit, but we would really like for you to go out and use it if possible." Wow. So we did. They doubled our line, and we bought 6 companies in the next. It was about 13 or 14 months, but none of that would have been possible had we not implemented scaling up. The year before. So we were growing like crazy, and it was super helpful. So.
And I love that story. And I wonder if you could pinpoint what was the thing you think the bank saw in your business at that time that said that they felt comfortable with you going out and they're going to double your line of credit. What would they see? Because obviously they might not have known of this thing called scaling up. They just knew your business was running well.
Yeah.
Put your finger on what it was.
Yeah, so early on with our bank, it was our first and second companies that we bought. It was a crazy story where we had made an offer on a business and we didn't win the bid, and then we bid on another company and we won that bid. So that was our first acquisition. It was May of 03. And while we were at the closing table signing the documents for that closing, the broker called that was representing the bid that we lost, and he said, "Hey, the deal's fallen through. It's back on the table." And I had my CFO, who was kind of a fractional CFO, was really just a good friend of mine who was a CPA. He was the one that had the original relationship with the bank and said, "Hey, you should think about doing acquisition." So I turned to him and I said, we were in Pensacola, Florida, that's where our first company we bought was, and the other one was in Portland, Maine. So I turned to him, I said, "Ralph, Portland's back on the market. The deal fell through." And it was little. I think we had bid $1.1 million. We lost to a bid of $1.2 million. And Ralph said, "Well, tell him we can do $1 million." I said, "Well, how are we going to do that?" He goes, "Just say." So I said to the broker, "Hey, we're in. We can do $1 million because we're closing this other deal." 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. He said, "Okay, they accept." So now we've got to convince the bank. By the way, that between the two deals, we were a little tiny company at this point. Between the two deals, the bank was going to have to lend us more than our gross revenue, our total revenue in the prior year, to get these two deals done. But so we were told, "Yeah, we can do it." The bank said we can do it, and we were about a week away from closing. And the guy that became one of my close friends was still new to us at this point. He called. He said, "Hey, we can't do it. I just can't get it through underwriting." And we had a deposit that we were going to lose and reputation risk. And so Ralph, the CFO, the fractional CFO who had the relationship with this bank, went back and he looked, and he had brought about $100 million in lending to the bank, and not a single penny of the $100 million had ever defaulted.
Okay.
So he called the banker and he said, "Andy, I've brought you over $100 million in deals. Not a single penny has gone bad. I put my name on this one. I'm telling you, it's not going to go bad. And if we can't get it done, my relationship with the bank and with you is over."
Wow.
He said, "You put us in a terrible spot." So I found out years later, we were invited then, I think 2 days later, to present to the director of credit. And in the US, the director of credit is the guy they lock in a room that you're not allowed to ever meet, who really makes all the decisions. And they don't want them influenced by like humans. They just want them to sit and look at spreadsheets. So we got a meeting with the director of credit. And again, I found out years later, so he could tell us no face to face, was why we were going to this meeting. But we thought we were going to pitch why this was a good idea for the bank to lend us more money than we did in revenue the prior year. So we sat down, and the lesson in this I carry with me to this day is I looked at it from the bank's perspective completely. So what's the risk profile from the bank's perspective? And so I looked at our recurring revenue. We were a big recurring revenue business, and totally put myself in the banker's shoes, and actually was able to demonstrate to him that if we miss our targets and things start to go bad, the one thing this broker had on his website where he had done about 80 transactions, and he had them listed anonymously, but he listed the revenue, what they sold for, and how long it took to get the transaction done. So I took the bottom 5 and I said, "Well, we can assume the 5 worst are the fire sale businesses. So let's look at these bottom 5 and let's look at the worst one of all. And if you apply these multiples to our revenue that we're going to buy and the revenue that we already have, you've got 2.5 times protection on the loans." So because of the way that industry traded, and we'd already had a book of business. We were an existing ongoing company. So when you added it all together and you used the fire sale multiples, we were 2.5 times protected on their debt, was 2.5 times covered. So that was one piece. And then we looked at the time it took to close those fire sales, and literally, Phil, they averaged like 7 or 8 days, right? So I said probably the most fundamental question to this director of credit, Glenn Coker, still a good friend, almost 20 years later. I said, Glenn, on your hard asset collateral, like real estate, can you close those in 7 days? And he laughed. He said, no, it takes us like 6 months to perfect hard asset collateral. I'm like, well, it's cash flow, but you're looking at it, you can close it in 7 or 8 days, fire sale. And I said, and you can keep it. Like,
wow.
you can take it, fire sale it, and you can 2x cover your debt, keep it. Like, and he's like, really, you'd be willing to sign off on that? And I said, 100%. We are so confident in how we're running the business. 100% I would sign off on that. Wow. And his last words were, all right, I don't want to see you back at this table for at least a year, and you better prove what you said. And we got the loan. So yeah, so that was so fast forward 6 years, we always treated the bank like a partner, not a vendor. So they wanted quarterly financials, we gave them monthly financials. Anytime there was any hiccup, we proactively said, hey, here's what happened, here's what we did to fix it, and here's our go forward plan. So we really treated them like a partner. So when the day came, the financial crisis day came, we were an easy choice for them to come in and say, and they said, we're going to double your line. But we really want to make sure you go out and use it. And we did. We bought 6 companies in 13, 14 months.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned about, when they're talking about risk profile just now, because, if I think about the risk profile of most entrepreneurs, they are risk profiled by nature to be high. But actually, for you to go and buy that and for them to take the gamble on you, although it's a lighter gamble because you've got the processes behind you, they're still taking a gamble because it's their money. And no one knew where that financial crisis was going to go. Back in 2009, when we were at the height of that, or the depths of the crisis rather than the height of it, there was all sorts of stuff going on. There were banks closing down, there were businesses closing down. So how would you describe your own risk profile? Because you started your business in your back bedroom. It's a 24-hour business. You're a young entrepreneur at that time. How would you?
Very young.
Well,
I was 23, 24.
Wow. So from a risk profile point of view, where would you have put yourself when you started that business first day? What was your propensity for risk?
I think I was too dumb to realize how much risk I was taking on. So, and failure just was never, like, I just never thought about, could this business fail and what would happen if it did? And it just and I went through a really tough stretch those first couple of years because we couldn't afford employees. So, I had a big buzzer next to my bed that we were 24/7 when the phone rang, it had to get answered. And so I was pretty sleep deprived, but it's just what you had to do. Like I never thought about the what if this doesn't work out. Now my mom, who did our books and answered the phone periodically so I could take a nap here or there, every day she did say, this is the dumbest idea you've ever had. You should get rid of this thing. It's crazy. That went on for about 2 years. But so she knew how stupid it was, but I had no idea. So
the wisdom of age and maturity.
It's absolutely, you could never do it. And that's why I think, all kidding aside, when you are young, you don't have kids and you don't have responsibilities, and if you do fail, you're going to be able to bounce back probably. And it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. And now the one change that I would make is starting from scratch versus can you buy a small company in the beginning. The whole flywheel thing to me is fascinating. Starting companies from scratch in hindsight is a whole lot harder than going out, and because if you do it right and you spend the time and the effort, you should be able to buy a small company where the cash flow services the debt. We did it 24 times. So it's not like, and we did it with, by the way, no money, not a single penny of capital out of pocket. 24 times we bought companies with bank debt and seller financing, never a penny of our own.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And you can still do that. The magic number, by the way, is 3 times EBITDA. If you can buy a company, and I don't care, unless interest rates get into the double digits, whatever, at 6, 7, 8, 9% interest, you can, if you pay 3 times cash flow, 3 times EBITDA, you can service just about any flavor of debt. 5-year term debt, 7-year term debt, 10-year, and it will work if you pay 3.
Because you've got the recurring revenue coming in, and you know that you can project out 3 years in the future, and you know that revenue, if you continue the business at its same trajectory, will continue to pay back.
Yeah, even if you don't grow it, and this is how we talked about when I explain how private equity works.
Yeah.
If you look at private equity, typically they use 3 to 4 times debt, 3 to 4 times EBITDA in debt, and 3 to 4 times EBITDA in equity. And with no growth at all, they double the value of the business in 5 years because they're able to use the cash flow of the business to pay off the debt.
And they're just paying the same way. Of course they are. Yeah, I like that. That's so we might come back to that in a second. I just want to carry on this thing about the risks. I think, as you said, starting from scratch versus buying. And a lot of people wouldn't think about going to buy a business because they see the risk involved, and they think starting a business is the easy option. Now, a lot of people continue in their normal jobs. They never think starting a business is easy. So let's caveat it with that. But those people who are starting this think, hey, let's just do it on my own. Let's create it. But there's some people out there like you who decided, okay, let's go and buy something else. So you're running this 24-hour business. You've got a call center business. You're answering the phone whenever it rang. You then decide to start employing people. When was the point you decided you needed a support to do that? Because obviously, as a coach, I sit here and we love working with people, but they've got to realize they need help. They've got to realize that they're the problem. They're the blocker on growth because of lots of things. So when did you realize I need to find support for this through either Birthing of Giants or EO or other things?
Yeah. So I was, even as a kid, from the time I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old, a learner, like a real business. I was fascinated by, my grandmother used to joke that, I would always say when I grew up, and I didn't know the word entrepreneur, but, I was 10 years old. What are you going to do when you grow up? And I didn't say fireman or policeman. I said, I'm going to own a business, which got a lot of strange looks. But so I kind of always had it in me, I think. And was really like drawn to anything I could find. I was probably Fortune magazine's youngest subscriber. I had a Fortune magazine subscription and a Forbes magazine subscription when I was 12. So I just, it was in me, I think. So Birthing of Giants was a natural outflow. And we had, we had employees early on.
Yeah. Okay.
But, we might have people like 9 to 5 and so I would cover all the fringe times, the overnights. And so I would say probably when we got to about 25 or 30 people was when I realized that, this thing was way bigger than my capability to handle. And that's when we started to bring some other people in that could actually help on the sales side and on the management side, and not just, someone to sit there and answer the phone. But 25, 30 is about the time where, and there's an adage in business when your company's big enough that it's hard to know everybody's name. That's when you need a senior team.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and actually, because as founder, you can't know everybody when there's 30 people out there. You try to, but actually, with best will in the world, you're not going to know everybody intimately. So that's
it's hard. We were 650 people in 24 offices when we sold. So it was. Now we would get in the plane every quarter, and we would go visit all 24 offices and do face-to-face with. We would do 2 or 3 face-to-face meetings per office. So every employee once a quarter had the opportunity to get face-to-face time with me, our COO, sometimes our CFO would go, and then our head of, we call it people experience. But so we banned the term HR, human resources, I think is so impersonal. So we call it the employee experience department.
Love it.
And we had one person that kind of ran that compliance side. So make sure all the paperwork's right and we're following the rules the right way. But then we had another role in that to department that was solely focused on employee happiness, basically. And that person would often travel to the town hall meetings as well. And then she would basically take notes the entire time. And then we'd put a report together and we would send it back after, a couple weeks later. These are all the issues that were raised, here's what we're doing and how we're trying to, here's why we can or why we can't address this issue or that. But we took pretty extensive notes and gave, pretty extensive feedback on their feedback.
Yeah.
So,
and the point there is you're getting everyone of the 650 people in 24 offices is getting a chance to talk and be noticed and have their voice put over. So I think that's a real engagement piece. When I think about engagement, I look across on my bookshelves now. Me and Don Monkhouse talk about this. There's a book, the Happiness Manifesto, looking at how do you build happy employees? How do you create people in your business that want to be there? And when scaling up, we use this, and I come back to the Jim Collins, getting the right people on the bus, but having them willingly on your bus.
Yeah.
So I've got two questions on that. What did you see as the biggest driver for engaging your staff? Because we often talk about purpose as being a big driver. But I wonder, what, in your experience of getting 650 people on your bus, what was the thing that engaged them?
So, it's really interesting. And I do a whole keynote on employee engagement. And first of all, we learned all this by being terrible at it to start and making tons of mistakes. And I always caution, when you listen to a business speaker, especially one that's run companies, and you get to hear all the good stories and all the successes. And we tend not to talk about all the misses and mistakes. And so I will say straight away, we were terrible at it. I was actually at a conference in Canada with another good friend of mine who owned a business in Canada that was kind of a mirror of ours in the US. 15 offices, same equipment platform, like really similar to us. And a good operator, good guy, really into employee engagement. We're having a beer and he said, "Hey, what's your voluntary employee turnover?" And I said, "We're at like 110%. And he looks me dead in the eye. He goes, "Man, that's fantastic." And I'm like, "Doug, how can you say that's fantastic?" He goes, "Well, we're at like 120. And our industry average is like 150 to 200. If you're under 150, you're really doing well." And it's a tough business, right? We call center space. I go, "Well, why do we tolerate that? Like, that's asinine." So we were scaling up methodology. It was time to do another quarterly planning. And I came back and I said, "Listen, we can debate our priorities all we want, but number one on our list this quarter, we have to get on top of this turnover thing. This is ridiculous." So we created a what came out of that planning session was a program called Dream On. And Dream On is like the Make-A-Wish charity model, but for employees.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah. And there's been a bunch written on it. There's some stuff, I think if you Google Apple Tree Dream On, there's a video that's online that kind of tells some of the story. But so we started that, and a bunch of other things. Core values were hugely important to us. But again, when we started Dream On, we were still at 110% turnover. The 110% was on the call center employee side, the hourly employees. Our salaried employees, there were only about, at the time, maybe 75 of us or so. But salaried employee turnover was like 3 or 4%. And hourly was 110. So you can imagine what a fun place that was to go to work. Like there was a, cultural warfare going on.
3% here, 120% here, 110% here.
Yeah, and just the lack of trust. And I mean, it creates all these follow-on issues. And I actually really believe that employee turnover is the most important hidden cost in any business. And when we look at companies to buy or to sell, or when we do M&A, that's rarely asked what your turnover is, but so critically important. And so we were able to fund, we granted about 300 or 400 dreams over the 4-year span that we had that program. And it was not that we did it for this reason, but it was totally funded by what we were saving in turnover by a factor of like 10 times. Like its return was at least 1,000% over what it cost. And That's the hard dollar cost. The soft cost, you can't even, customer turnover went down, and and just across the board, it just was. We went from a not very fun place to go to work to a very fun place to go to work. But you asked, what are some of the fundamentals? There is one fundamental that I think trips up everyone that's got very few entrepreneurs want a bad culture, right? You don't wake up and say, all right, well, how can we make our culture worse today?
Yeah.
But a lot of them can't seem to get out of their own way on the culture side. And I think it comes down to one critical thing. You're never going to get 100% buy-in. If you can get 70% buy-in, you're totally winning. And the 70% will repel the 30%. So here's my challenge to you, everyone listening to this, and our entire coaching community. Go to your clients and ask them for their employee handbook. And if they hand you a 112-page employee handbook that covers every eventuality known to man and all the bad things that we're going to do to you if you violate any of these 112 pages, then what they've done, and again, it's human nature, but 4 years ago, someone burned us on X. So we better have a rule that says if you do X.
Yeah.
So our employee handbook was it might have been 3 pages, and 2 of it were like, how to have fun at work. But our whole philosophy was, you're an adult, we're going to treat you like an adult, and you figure out, if you want to be in an environment where you're treated like an adult.
Wow.
And you'll love it here. And if not, if you need 112 pages, this is not the place for you. And we were able to repel. And listen, 20% of our people were late and did all the things and all the stuff that pisses you off.
Yeah.
But so the fundamental is no rules that are designed to address the behavior of fewer than 20% of your team. So if there's something in your handbook that is, well, this happened to us once, so we better have it in here, or 10% of our people just can't get in on time.
Yeah.
Having the rule isn't going to do anything. They're still going to come in late.
They're going to be late.
They're going to be rude. They're not. You're not going to change their behavior with a book, but you will piss off the 90% that are doing it the right way.
Yeah.
And so no rules that are designed to address the behavior of less than 10, or I like 20, but if you're scared of 20, make it 10% of the people. And you'll be amazed how that subtle shift in mindset, but so many times we focus on the outlier, the one person that upset us. And then we've got 112 pages of rules.
Yeah. And it is rules. It's rules for rules' sake. And actually, you're right. It's not going to affect those 10, 20% that are actually making the bad choices in the first place.
Nope. Exactly right. And that's, So that for me, that's the fundamental thing. I know it sounds way oversimplified, but it's really about getting your mindset in the right place.
Yeah.
And that was the shift for our team. Dream On was a great vehicle and it did lots of really, really, really amazing stuff. But that mindset, and then every salaried employee in our company on their desk we had them made. They had a sign that said, what can I do today to make the employee experience better than it was yesterday? So that was the question we asked every day. And it's so much dumb stuff. Like, employees quit over really, really dumb things. Like my laptop keeps crashing and I've told you 10 times. Yeah. Or, in our business, in the call center business, you'd be horrified at the headsets that we make people wear that, that this one finishes their shift and throws the headset on the desk, and the next one comes in and headset's not working, or keyboards. Like, we were buying cheap $15 keyboards for the computers, and which was great for like the first 2 weeks until the letters wore off. So you literally,
too much.
If you didn't know how to type and you had to see the letters up, you couldn't, because they were all worn out. So we started to buy nicer keyboards, and we bought better technology, and chairs. That was the other thing. We did 24 acquisitions. 24 out of 24 times we walked into office space that you wouldn't want your worst enemy to work in, and we saw people sitting in chairs that were like torture devices, missing a wheel, so they'd spend 8 hours like leaning to the left. So one of the first things we did when we would buy, and again, we learned this over time. This wasn't the first few deals, but once we figured this part out, one of the first things we would do is we would buy the Herman Miller Aeron chair.
Wow, expensive.
And
Expensive.
they are. We bought so many, we were actually able to negotiate a really, really, really good deal. I think we were paying under $500 for Aeron chairs.
Wow. Okay.
But everything was a marketing event, especially when you buy a company, because everyone's terrified they're going to lose their job.
Yeah, the new guy coming in.
So on day one, it was all paperwork, and and we used video a ton. This was back in back when video was actually a novel idea. Now it's ubiquitous, but we were using video in 2005, 6, 7 to welcome people, and different offices would create these welcome videos. So day one was all about our brand and the paperwork and all the stuff. But on day two, we'd already ordered them. We had them scheduled to drop ship on the right day, and we would take all the old chairs. We would march in with tied balloons on them, and there were videos on how ergonomic they are. We had a filmmaker on staff that made this really cool, these are all the movies that you can see it in. It's in the Museum of Modern Art. More importantly, here's how it works. Here's how it's going to make your 8 hours you spend at the desk better. And we would wheel all the old chairs out and wheel the Aeron chairs in this big parade of fanfare. So it did a couple things. One, now they're in the right chair.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they see that we're committed to their
big change.
Saying things is one thing, doing things is another. And yeah, it was they're expensive. You're right. I mean, 30 times 500 is still a big number. The funniest part was when we sold the company. So only the front line got Aeron chairs. The managers, they got whatever was left, if it was any good, or we had a different chair, a different manager chair that was a lower level chair than the Aeron, and very, very prescriptive about, we want the best chair for the most important people on the team, and that those are the ones handling our customers' phone calls.
Yeah.
So I got in more arguments with space planners. We would almost always have to move, because the space that the company we acquired was in terrible space, old supermarkets and just awful space.
Cheap locations.
Yes, a third of what our normal rent would be for the kind of office we wanted to work in. So we almost every time would have to move within the first period of time, and then we just factored that in as part of it. By the way, if this is another, if you're in class C or D crappy office space, and and I don't know, post-COVID, maybe the world's changed, but we were able to pay for the difference in rent by reducing employee turnover and hiring better, because we had better space. So to us, it wasn't an expense.
Yeah,
it was an investment that paid back. Yeah. So, and again, we learned the hard way. We were in the lousiest office space. The first 3 offices we were in before we bought another company, I did what every dumb young entrepreneur does. I found the cheapest thing I could find. When I had to start hiring a senior team and salaried employees, people would come for the interview and they'd look around and be like, I'd literally have people say, I just don't think I could work in this space. And I'm like, you know what? I don't like it either. So finally we were able to get.
You don't work in a shithole, and actually want to attract the right employees. You've got to put the right message out there.
Yeah, and it's all subconscious. You set the tone by the environment. So now I'm a massive believer in the importance of office space and setting the proper subconscious or unconscious tone when you get there. So we moved all the time. Just about every company we bought, we had to move.
Wow.
So the space planners would come and we'd have to lay out wherever we were going. And we always wanted the cubicles, where the frontline employees would work, to have the best view, by the windows and space. They just couldn't get their heads around it. No, that's where the executive offices go.
Mahogany row,
walls there, build offices. I'm like, no. Those can go in, on the inside where there's no view. That they'll be able to see. We'll put a window in their office so they can see out on the floor, and eventually they can see out the real windows. The best space is for the frontline employees. And
That's amazing.
I can't tell you how many times space planners were like,
oh, I love that.
I can't even draw it up that way. So yeah. So that I'm a massive believer in the importance of having great space.
Yeah, I love that. So here's a slightly different question in that case. We often talk about purpose, and I was talking to Vern about this when the new book's released. Purpose plays a big part in businesses, but it didn't always. So do you want to talk about purpose at all? Is it relevant? Is it something that, I believe it is, but what's your thoughts on that word purpose in business and especially around engagement? You talked about, having a head of people, having people there engaged. And we often talk about, if you were creating a business, having a purpose above and beyond making money, but look at how we can use that money for good. But I wonder, do you think it actually works, having a purpose that you'll buy into?
So I think it's actually a great question. I think where we get in trouble as entrepreneurs when it comes to engagement is more around authenticity. So when we hear that, we have to have a purpose, and you want to attract people that want to be part of something bigger than themselves. But if you're not naturally wired that way, but you try and fake it because you're told you're supposed to do it, I think people can see through that authenticity gap massively. And so when I keynote on engagement, one of the things I talk about is don't do any of this if you don't deeply believe it's your responsibility to do it. And if you're doing it, as soon as an employee feels like you're doing things to try and manipulate their behavior, my running joke was always, if you've got a mediocre culture, you have, mediocre engagement. But people are there and work's getting done. And if you don't deeply believe that you owe it to everyone, it's your responsibility to fix it, and you're going to put in the ping pong table and the snacks in the break room, but you're going to be resentful about it because you think you have to do those things to manipulate your employees, they're going to go from moderately engaged to fully engaged to make your life a living hell. Like, they're going to now have a purpose, and their purpose is going to be, screw you, you're trying to manipulate me. Now I have a reason to come to work, and I want to make your life a living hell. So don't do anything around employee engagement if you don't believe in it. And what I'll say on that, and I've said this 1,000 times to 10,000 entrepreneurs, you don't have to like people. You don't have to be a people person. And I actually got asked this by, I was on doing someone's podcast actually. And we had a great half hour, like it was videoed, it was awesome. And the guy's a friend of mine, and we get to the end, and I'm talking about culture because that was our thing. And by the way, we took our frontline from 110% to 18%.
Wow, turnover. I was going to ask what that was. So, okay, 18%.
In the call center space, we got it to 18%. So I did a lot of interviews, and I got asked about that all the time. So I get to the end of this one, and I'll say his name. It's Joe Polish. He runs a mastermind called Genius Network.
Love it.
Joe and I are good friends. We're on Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands. We finish up. It's beautiful. The view, amazing. And we get to the end. He goes, John, all this sounds great, but what if you just don't like people? And I knew he was being a smart ass because he is a smart ass. I go, Joe, I know you're trying to be funny, but you're right. That's actually a fantastic question. And as you asked me that question, here's what just popped in my head. You don't have to like people at all. I'm so glad he asked the question because I've repeated this story thousands of times. You don't have to like people. You don't have to even agree that it's your responsibility to have good employee engagement and all these things. You don't have to buy into any of it. But if you don't wake up every day unbelievably grateful that these random people keep showing up at your place to make your dreams, your financial dreams, your dreams of being an entrepreneur, your independence, all those things, if you're not deeply grateful to every single person that shows up, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. You're in the wrong, you're in the wrong role. You should go work for somebody else, because you don't have to like them. You don't have to love them. You don't have to buy into any of it. But man, you have to respect the fact that they show up at your place every day to make your dream a reality, not their own,
That's
but
impressive.
yours.
Yeah.
And if you can't wrap your head around that, you have no business whatsoever being an entrepreneur. So it was a total smart ass question, but I'm really glad you asked me, because that in that moment it crystallized it all for me.
Yeah.
Now I also believe that core values matter and purpose matters, but that's me.
Yeah.
But I know cynical entrepreneurs that are successful, and their cultures are maybe not as good as they could be. But when they get that shift in their head that, yeah, you're right, why do these people show up here every day? And 50 years ago, it was, well, because they get a paycheck.
Like, here's your money.
Yeah, right. Like, they owe us a debt of gratitude. We're paying them. The world doesn't work that way anymore. I mean, they've got a phone that, they could be at work and not work all day long now. Like, there's no,
coasting away.
I think it was Aubrey Daniels, who we've had speak at Scaling Up a bunch of times. He said and he's a researcher on employee engagement. And he said, on average, employees have about 40% discretionary energy that they can choose to spend either making your company better or not. And if they're not engaged, you'll get about 60% of their effort. If they're sort of engaged, you might get 70, but if you can get them deeply engaged, you can get 100% of that, of their energy, of which 40 of the 100 is totally discretionary. Wow. And I believe that. I mean, you look at, like, I can walk into a hotel now. I mean, you and I travel a lot, so you know what it's like, right? There's been in thousands of hotels, and I can tell typically within 30 seconds how good or bad the general manager is. And it's not about, it's not about, is the lobby clean? Like, you can just tell in an instant. And we, when we had a lot of people that were, that moved from frontline into salaried roles that had never been, we probably put, I don't know, 75 people on their first airplane flight. I mean, it was that kind of like socioeconomic sort of elevation of a lot of people. And a lot of people traveled for the first time, especially business travel.
Wow.
And we always said, we that person that took the notes on the town halls, she was, a rough background and really elevated and became an amazing part of our story. And she did a lot of business travel for the first time herself. So she actually created this checklist. Hey, if you've never traveled for work before, and it was stupid, simple stuff, but really important. And one of the things that we always challenge people to do if they were new to business travel is, hey, just like watch people's behavior as you interact with, when you're at Starbucks in the airport, you're buying a coffee, or the flight attendant, or like, and just, try and notice like how different people go about their days. And we had people that said, hey, Southwest Airlines, the flight attendants act totally different than they do on American. And like, so we really want them to kind of cue into that kind of stuff. That's too when they travel. Yeah. But you can tell right away. I mean, you know who's working for a good manager and who's working for a bad manager, especially in hotels. That's where it's. Yeah.
And it is fascinating. I still think my favorite hotel was in St Andrews in Scotland, one of the golf courses. And I went out there, and at that time I used to do a lot of running, and I was staying in some nice hotels around the UK and other places, and loved hotels that made a difference. And I remember my favorite hotel in St Andrews. I'd been out for a run one morning, and as I came back into the door, sweaty. Scotland is always cold, but this time it was hot up there. It was in October, I think, or September. I ran the door, and almost as if by magic, the doorman came across and not just opened the door, gave me a bottle of water and a towel. And I thought, how did he know? But it was just like magic. I mean, you see at the gym, I didn't know who the GM was, but that hotel had it right. That doorman is on my mind, and that was almost 10 years ago. Now, I still talk about this guy. I wish I'd got his name, but he knew how to make me feel special as a sweaty runner walking in the door.
Phil, I have literally almost an identical story to that, and it was the best hotel experience I ever had. This is remarkable. Was at a place called Cancun Palace, which is part of Palace Resorts, which are all inclusive, like tourist hotels. Right? We're not talking about the Mandarin. We're talking about Cancun Palace. And it was nice. I mean, it was a really nice hotel.
Yeah.
But it was so remarkable there. And I had a team of about 10 people, and I was the president of the organization that had booked this for one of our conferences. Okay. So there were like 400 people that we had down there, but 10 of my own team. And every morning when you came out, all the cords on all the phones were like perfectly wrapped right around the house phones in the whole hotel. Yeah. So one morning we came out, and I had noticed it, and I'd said to my team, I'm like, somebody take that phone off so that the cord hangs down, and then we're going to see how long it takes to get back.
Just noticing.
And it was like 2 minutes, and we walk by, and it's back the way it's supposed to be, because every employee there knows. But because I was the president, we had an awards lunch, and we happened to do it outside, and it's Cancun, it's hot. Right. And, I'm always hot anyway. So I'm like super hot. So I've got the microphone, and there's tables with umbrellas, and I'm kind of walking around, and we're doing this big awards thing. So I'm moving around between the tables, speaking, and everyone's sort of like listening to me talk. And I'm hot. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see one of the bus women, okay, like not a server, but a busser, just very quietly sees like I'm walking among the tables, sort of predicts my trajectory of where I'm going to go, and places this like silver tray of rolled white washcloths, like little towels, covered in ice. Like she's got ice on it, and like 10 of these towels, and it literally just magically appears like in my path. And I was like, I stopped, and I'm like, all right, did everyone just see? And then I was so blown away that I had our event planner find the GM of the hotel. I'm like, I got to meet the guy. I've got to meet the guy.
Amazing.
And we talked, and I go, the phone cords, that's you, right? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, you're obsessed with details, aren't you? He's like, I don't know what you're talking. Like, he was so humble about it, but it was remarkable. And those employees, like, and from there, you obviously start to notice and then talk to employees, and they loved working for this guy. They loved him.
Amazing.
And it shows like that guy got out of bed every morning, and he was trying to create a great guest experience, but you don't create a great guest experience without super engaged employees. Yeah. And it's another part of my rant. My keynote on engagement is more rant than keynote. Another big part of my rant is we spend all these dollars externally on marketing to build our brand in the eyes of our customers. Yeah. And we don't spend dollars internally to build our brand in the eyes of employees. Try and create a great brand experience with disengaged employees. It's impossible. I think Starbucks had it right. Now they've completely blown it. But Starbucks would spend like $10 to every external marketing dollar, like $10 internally on employee engagement. And that's how you got the Starbucks experience from,
that's amazing.
A bunch of teenage kids selling overpriced coffee, as Vern likes to say. But they were deeply engaged because the dollars were spent internally, not externally. And then you look at hotels, they spend massive amounts externally, but not internally. And it's the total mismatch. Like, we should spend our marketing dollars to get our people to fall in love with our brand first, and then the brand experience just is going to follow.
Yeah. Do you know, I love you saying that, because I was running a workshop on Wednesday in Oxford, England, and we were just talking about some of the keys, and I talk about, the core purpose, core values, the core competence, and I was looking at the top of our page within Scaling Up, and I talked about brand promise, and I said, you've got to have your internal brand promise right first. So I'm glad you've just said that, because a lot of people talk about their brand promise as the external thing, but to me, it's the internal is more important. So that's music to my ears, because that is the way I believe it should be. That's how you get engagement. So John,
I completely, and Vern and I disagree on this. I think I was always employees first, and then everything follows. And Vern is employees, shareholders, customers are all equal legs, and now community are 4 equal legs on the stool. I totally disagree, and we laugh about it because we've disagreed about this now for a decade and a half, but I believe employees are the first priority because nothing good comes from mediocre engagement.
Yeah, you never get it. And actually, that is some experience. So, John, we could have come to the end of this now, and we haven't covered half the things I had in my mind to talk about.
I'm sorry.
No, I know, and I love it. I was going to talk about beliefs, talking about values, talking about culture. I was going to talk about the valuation thing, about finding your Rembrandts in the attic. That was what we came here to talk about, and we haven't done it. So I'll do this now. We can take it out of the show if you decide not to, but I'd love to have you back.
I'd be happy to come
if we
back.
can find some time, because I think there's another stack of things. The culture piece is the key, and to me, I talk about build this foundation of culture, skills, talent, and structure around that base. Have purpose at the core, and you build anything on that. And you can't scale a business without that solid foundation.
Yeah,
I think we've talked about that, and we've only skimmed the surface of that. But I'd love to go to that next piece around, how do we scale a business, and how do we create the value in it? So when you, even if you never want to sell, you've got a better business. It feels better. You've got employees there. So I'd love that conversation at some stage. If you're willing to have a part two,
I'd be more than happy to have a part two. And the really good news about our work, I think, is all the things that we teach entrepreneurs about how to run scalable, great companies translate when it's time to exit into more value for the business. So we talk about the employee or the entrepreneur being redundant.
Yeah.
So imagine two identical companies. In one, the entrepreneur works 10 hours a week and they've completely set it up, to be autonomous and not need them at all. And the other one, the entrepreneur's working 80 hours a week. Everything else is the same. The revenue, the profitability, all the fundamentals exist in both companies. But one, the entrepreneur's 10 hours, one's 80 hours. Which one would you rather buy?
I'm going to buy the 10 hours. Yeah.
All the stuff that we teach around purpose and values and engagement and systems and process and strategy, all those things translate into valuation. And, it's funny. I haven't talked about culture in a while because most of the time it's exit strategy that is the topic. So I appreciate the opportunity to do it because it's actually what I'm most passionate about.
I love it.
And, I think back, and I've said this many times as well, I can think of lots of successful entrepreneurs that didn't have great culture and, and their core didn't have core values, or they were platitudes and just poster on the wall.
Yeah.
That are successful. And I can think about a lot of those entrepreneurs that have failed, right? A lot of them have failed. And a lot of them, some, get some level of success. So it's not a prereq for success to build that great foundation and core values and purpose and all those things. But I struggle, and to this day really can't think of a company that went deep on core values, purpose, really had the foundation right, that has failed. So you kind of stack the deck in your favor. So you don't have to have a great culture to scale, but it's almost impossible to fail when you have a really solid foundation with a great culture and deeply engaged employees. So really, to me, there's only one way to run a company, and that is on a core values, fundamentals, purpose-based foundation, because you're just stacking the deck in your favor. And you can, and again, you can gut it out with mediocre culture and maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah.
But it's hard to think of a company that really, really went deep on the core values front and culture front that has failed. So, I'm sure,
I think that's an amazing piece. And I hadn't thought of it from that angle before, but I think you're right. When I hear you say that resonates so much, that get that stuff right. And it's almost, we talk about sustainability. That's the thing that sustains your business for the long term. Get that right, and people want to be there. And I just think it's such a great message. And if I could go back and have that conversation with Jim Collins about how to build good to great, actually to me that's the key message that's got to be in there. Get the culture right, and it's building that for the future. So
you stack the deck in your favor. And again, I'm sure someone will come up with an example of a great culture that failed. But normally the first sign of a company heading south, that if there is, like, again, let's look at Starbucks. Not that they've failed by any stretch, but it was when their culture started to erode that, the trouble started there. And you take your eye. it was a simple thing in the beginning. And listen, I get the economics of it, but Starbucks was famous for paying 100% of healthcare for employees.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, well, we can't afford that anymore. And look what's happened since. So, that's probably not the only, and certainly not the only thing, but that's where it started to me was, hey, we've built this incredible culture through a handful of key activities, and now we're going to abandon one of those. And again, the hidden cost of turnover, we certainly would never be able to do the math, but I would suggest that insurance, the money they saved by changing their program, a lot of it was probably leaking out in turnover.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's
but that's
their hill to climb, not mine. But
and it's a really interesting message, isn't it? Because often we cut that, and whatever's happening economically in the world at the moment, a lot of businesses will be cutting back on things. And the key message I would say to people to take away from that is, don't cut back on your employee benefit. Don't cut back on those things that really motivate people, because you want people to be really on your bus, willing to work with you through thick and thin. And if you cut out that stuff that you might have not realized it, but that's the stuff that people really rely on, that will damage your culture irreparably later on. And it's a frog in the hot water. Eventually you'll just die because of it. And I think
1,000%.
Yeah.
We sold to a publicly traded S&P 500 publicly traded company, and they paid a premium. Our industry was about 3 to 4 times EBITDA. We were buying companies at 3.5. That's why I said that magic number of 3. And we sold for over 14, close to 15 times EBITDA in the call center space, unheard of.
Wow.
And part of what they paid for was 18% frontline employee turnover, great culture, but they couldn't wrap their head around some of the expense stuff. And the Aeron chair was like the harbinger. The Aeron chair was the canary in the coal mine. So my COO, Kevin O'Connor, who's now scaling up coach, stayed on for about 4 years with the company that acquired us. And he was doing acquisitions. We were really good at buying smaller companies and wrapping them in. And that's part of what they paid for too. It was his 3rd transaction he was working on, and he put the order in for 50 Aeron chairs, and he gets a call from the head of HR. They did use the term HR at that company, and she goes, "What are you doing? You can't order. We don't buy Aeron chairs. What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, well, it's part of our formula." And they're like, "No." She goes, "Our CEO doesn't sit in an Aeron chair." And Kevin goes, "Yeah, neither did ours. It's only for the front line." She's like, "Absolutely not." And and it's a longer tail, but we had tried a different chair because the Aerons, they're expensive. You're right, they're expensive. So we had tried a different one, and when you slid it under the desk, the foam cushions were coming off and exposing the metal, and people were getting cut and whatever. So there's a funny town hall story. I go on a town hall and I'm all excited. We just bought all these they were Han office chairs. Like, how are the chairs? And they're like, "We really appreciate that you got new chairs, but they're cutting us." And I'm like, "What?" Next, we get back in the plane, fly to the next office. "Thanks so much for the chairs. Is there any way we can keep from getting cut?" I'm like, "Oh my God." So we returned all them and bought the Aerons. That was the first round of Aeron chairs. So sure enough, Kevin's, "You can't buy Aeron chairs." She goes, "We have a company chair that we can buy. You have to get new chairs." And it's the Han, whatever. It's the exact same chair that was cutting everybody. So he's like, "It's not going to work. It's going to cut everybody." And she's like, "Well, that's the chair." So next 2 acquisitions, they buy those chairs. They start getting workman comp claims. They're getting cuts. And so now they buy Aeron chairs. But yeah, that was and they did a lot of other dumb things. They took our turnover in 1 year from 18% to 80%. They undid like all the good employee engagement stuff. They got rid of Dream On because they said, "Well, if we do Dream On for just the call center people, we can't do it for the rest of the business. We're worried we're going to get unionized," like all this crazy nonsense.
Which
so 18 to 80%. Then they were having emergency meetings trying to figure out what to do about the turnover. And Kevin was like, "We have the formula right here." Yeah. They couldn't, they just wouldn't do it. So
and I love that point. I've just written down there, the Aeron chair was the canary in the coal mine, because actually it's that little thing. It's just a little chink in it. And actually, the more you do it, it just slowly degrades the culture you've built. And over time, You end up from where you were today, and you've suddenly got a completely different beast. And as you say, 18%, you worked hard to get that.
Yeah.
You knew the formula. Don't destroy it. And I think that's a really big message.
And you think just in hard cost, it's at least 5,000. Let's use a really conservatively low number, $5,000 to replace a frontline employee. It's probably more like 25,000, but I'll be generous and say 5. And you go from 18 to 80%. There were 500 frontline employees. So that's now you're hiring 400 people a year instead of 100 people a year at $5,000 a piece. Like, those numbers add up fast.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of chairs you could buy for that money.
Right? Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's what, $1.5 million. It's crazy. So, and that doesn't count because customer turnover was up. Like, they were struggling across the board, and it all started when the culture started to erode.
Yeah.
And people hated it. I mean, it was crazy.
Simple stuff. So look, John, we said we'd finish, and I'm respecting your time here. I could continue talking for ages because I love this story and I love the message there, and you've been so generous with your time. If there's one question I'm going to ask at the end, and I'll ask this question, and you may have already answered, but if you could go back and give the 22-year-old John a message for the future, what would it be? About the business or life?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I totally have lived my life by and fully believe in is if you're happy with where you are, you can't change a second of the past. And the good and the bad, and there was a whole lot of bad. But you get to where you are by all those moments stringing together, and 1 second of change, one tiny thing could change the entire course. I would probably say to my 22-year-old self, when things are really hard and lousy and you don't want to be doing what you're doing, enjoy the entire journey. Like, because it's in those moments of struggle that you build your skills, right? We don't build our skills when things are swimmingly great. We build our skills when our back's against the wall. We build our toughness when we face hard things. And I had the tendency to be miserable when I was miserable, if that makes sense. And in hindsight now, I relish a lot of what the challenges were because it baked me into who I am today. But I was not like, I went through some serious depression and so that's what I would say. I would say, it's going to have highs and lows, but enjoy the entire ride, because you're going to end up in a good spot with, the ability to get on and have the conversation we had today. We don't have this conversation without the lows, right? If they were all highs, we wouldn't learn anything. So
that's very, very
that's
true.
probably what I would say.
I love that. I am. There's so many more questions I could ask that, but I'm going to save them for next time. But I think, John, that's an amazing answer to finish with. And I think thank you for that. So appreciate your time, and I do look forward to having you back at some stage and getting dating your busy diary to have a follow-up conversation to talk about the next stage of this, because I think there's the evolution of this, which would be wonderful. So thank you, John.
I am happy to do it anytime. So Kristen she'll figure out how to get it in there.
We'll get her in it. Brilliant. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.